God says, do you tell the sun what time to get up? My job in our house is alarm clock. I'm the first one up, and so I know when folks need to get up, and I'm usually the one going, hey, Abby, time to get up. Hey, Will, time to get up. Darby, time to get up. Heather? No. No, I'm the one that's up, and I kind of watch. But the sun beats me up, and even if I happen to get up before the sun, I don't tell it to get up. It does on its own. God says, you ever wake the sun up? Hey, son, you overslept. Get busy. You ever tell the morning when to start? No, we do our best to guess when morning will start, right? My weather app will tell me sunrise will be at such and such a time. We figure it out. God sets it. You know how you and I can set an alarm on our phone and we can change the time? Well, God looks and he changes the time and says, this is when sunrise will be. Can you do that, Job? Can you cause the dawn to know its place? That it might take hold of the ends of the earth. The rays of the sun light up the whole world. The illuminated earth is transformed. Been really in this last generation or so that we've begun to get pictures from space where we can see what looks like. You've seen the time lapse as the earth rotates and the sun lights up. It's beautiful. God gets that view every morning and has since the very first. He says, can you tell the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the end of the earth, and the wicked be shaken out of it? It takes on form like clay under a seal and stands out like a garment. Can you set the course of the day? Now, I love my to-do list. I love my schedule. But as somebody reminded me this very morning, you want to make God laugh? Tell him your plans. I said, well, Scripture says we ought to commit our plans to the Lord. But you've had those days, right? I got my to-do list, I got my schedule, and by 9:15 in the morning, they're both trash because the day has gone a completely different direction. God presses into the day like a seal, and it conforms exactly to his will. Like clay under a seal. That's the will of God. Can you do that to your day? I can't. Job can't. From the wicked their light is withheld, and the upraised arm is broken. Have you entered the springs of the sea? Or have you walked in search of the depths? Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the doors of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the breadth of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Job's talked a lot about this stuff, right? He's talked a lot about the gate of Sheol. He's talked a lot about death and wishing he was dead. He says, you talked about it, but you ever been there? Do you know what you're talking about, Job? Tell me. He goes on. And I know we could dig in on a lot of these, but I want you to kind of get the sense of what God is asking Job. Because Job didn't get a chance to stop and do word studies on every question. They were just coming at him rapid fire. Where's the way to the dwelling of light? And darkness, where is its place? That you may take it to its territory, that you may know the paths to its home. Do you know it because you were born then? Or because the number of your days is great? Have you entered the treasury of snow? Have you seen the treasury of hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? By what way is light diffused, or the east wind scattered over the earth? Look at all the different questions. Job just moves through so many areas of science, so many areas of wisdom, so many areas of philosophy. Do you really understand death? Do you know where you go at death? Do you know how it looks? Can you draw me a map to the gates of death? Do you know where the light is stored? And then God says, and do you know where the darkness is stored? Now, science will tell you there's no such entity as darkness. What is darkness? It's the absence of light. Y'all have seen that. Yeah, well, God says, I've got a room full of dark. I've got a storehouse full of dark. He speaks of it as a thing. And he says, I've got another storehouse, and it's just got snow in it. And a different one that's got hail in it. Remember we talked about those tools in God's toolbox? Elihu talked about, well, maybe God's got a storm in his toolbox, and God says, I have so much more than that, Elihu. In my toolbox, I can pull out light, I can pull out dark, I can pull out snow, I can pull out hail. I've got maps to places you can't even imagine. And I've got a seal that I just press down and set the whole course of the day. Now that's a toolbox. He says, Job, do you understand any of that? Can you tell me any of that? Do you know how light is diffused? Oh yeah, God, we know about a prism and how it breaks down all the different colors of light. Job didn't have that. Imagine for a moment what Job thought when white light shone through water and came out all the colors of the rainbow, literally. How'd that happen? God says, you know how I make all the colors out of light? Job says, I don't have a clue. He says, do you know how the east wind is scattered over the earth? You know, we have tracked Tropical Storm Barry that became Hurricane Barry, and if you've been watching the news, you've watched that giant mass of wind and rain swell and get bigger, and it makes landfall, and it begins to get smaller, and it goes back down to Tropical Storm Barry, and eventually it'll become Tropical Depression Barry. And at some point, there'll be people in Canada who get gust of wind Barry, right? Breeze Barry. Do you know where the wind goes? Where it all dissipates to? God says, I can tell you where every gust of air goes. Who's divided a channel for the overflowing water or a path for the thunderbolt? He says, I control nature. He says, when it floods, I know where the water's going. I make a channel for the water. Look at what else he says. To cause it to rain on a land where there's no one. A wilderness in which there is no man. What's God saying there? Why do we need rain? What's that? Crops need rain. That's the biggest thing. We're in farming country. Our farmers will tell you, yeah, we need the rain. The crops need the rain. God said, what's that? Yeah, we need it for life. The water is life. And in their society, they would cluster around places of water. God says, you ever wonder why I waste a rainstorm in the middle of the desert? Nobody lives there. Nobody's farming there. It doesn't feed any river or any lake. Why would I do that? Job would say, I don't know. Doesn't make any sense. And God says, I know why I do that. And maybe today we could talk about it, but certainly, can you imagine the folks out in California that even still are in some pretty serious drought conditions? Those cities that are saying, oh, our reservoirs down to 15% of what we could hold. The ones that are saying we're on the verge of running out of water, and God says, I think I'll dump a couple million gallons of water in the Sahara during this monsoon season. And the folks in California are going, couldn't you send that our way? We could use it. And God says, do you know why I do that? Do you know why I cause it to rain on a land where there's no one, a wilderness in which there's no man? To satisfy the desolate waste, to cause to spring forth the growth of tender grass. Has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? He says, from whose womb comes the ice and the frost of heaven? Who gives it birth? The waters harden like stone, and the surface of the deep is frozen. God says, can you manage water? Do you know when it's going to be dew or when it's going to be frost? Do you know when it's going to be a lake or when it's going to be frozen over and solid? Who creates that? God would say, I do. But Job, you don't even understand why I do it. I do all this, and you don't know why I do it. You don't understand it, and yet I take care of it. And then God says, let's quit looking at water, Job. Look up. Can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? He says, look at the stars. And certainly there is some great ideas there about the divine control of the heavens, the Pleiades, Orion. Can you bring out Mazaroth in its season? Can you guide the great bear with its cubs? God says, can you control the constellations? Orion's belt is the first constellation I learned to recognize. It's easy to spot those 3 stars in a line in the winter sky, and I could always seem to pick that one out. God says, can you loose Orion's belt? Can you change Orion's belt up? No, you can't. You can't. He says the Pleiades, the twins there, those constellations, and I know there's some discussion about that. But he says, can you look at the stars? And can you have any control over them? Can you bind them? Can you loose them? Can you lead them? Can you guide them? No, you follow the stars. They navigated by the stars. He says, do you know the ordinances of the heavens? The idea there is almost the coordinates. Can you set their dominion over the earth? God says, the heavens belong to me. The laws which govern the movements of heavenly bodies, they're my laws, Job. They're not yours. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds that an abundance of water may cover you? I love that picture. Remember when Elijah said it wouldn't rain? And Ahab said, you're bluffing. And then it didn't rain. And it didn't rain. And it didn't rain. And finally Elijah says, tell you what, Ahab, somebody's got to make it rain. So you get all your prophets of Baal and all your prophets of Ashtoreth, and you meet me on Mount Carmel. And we'll see if Baal, the thunderstorm god, can make it rain, or if Jehovah can make it rain. And God told the prophets of Baal, you go first. And so they put that sacrifice on the altar, and they danced, and they sang, and they hollered, and they cut themselves, and they begged, and they pleaded. Can you lift up your voice to the clouds that an abundance of water may cover you? And what happens? It says, no one listened, no one answered, nothing happened. I have a friend of mine who's a youth minister, and he said, I feel like that describes some of my youth classes with the high school group sometimes. No one listened, no one answered, nothing happened. But really, that's what happened in the heavens, right? It wasn't just some unruly teenagers. Nothing happened. Baal did his best, and nothing happened. And then Elijah says, tell you what, let's go get all the water we can find. And remember, it's a drought, and Elijah's pouring water on the ground. Those big stone jars of water, jar after jar. And then he prays once, and fire falls from heaven, and there's just a smoking crater where everything had been. The sacrifice was burned up, the wood was burned up, the stone was burned up, the dirt was burned up, the water was burned up, because that's how God does it. Verse 35, can you send out lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Can you command the lightning bolts? God continues to talk about meteorological stuff. And again, remember, this is all happening with a storm right in front of him. And I wonder if God doesn't put on a little bit of a lightning show as he said, hey, can you make the lightning dance like this? If you got a chance last week to see the 4th of July fireworks on the 3rd of July downtown on the riverfront, you know, it was touch and go there for a while. The storms were coming through, and they catch a break, and the fireworks are going off, and they're lighting up the sky, and then periodically, boom, boom, and the whole sky lit up, and it was lightning. And we kind of joked, it was almost as if God was saying amateurs, and he was putting on a show for us. The lightning was beautiful. Job, can you command the lightning? And then God says, who's put wisdom in the mind? Who's given understanding to the heart? He says, Job, who makes people smart? If you did know that, where'd you learn it from? You know, one of the things I am thankful for is some good friends in the medical field who know a lot. And they also know the bill's fixing to ring. Man. But they talk about, when they speak of all the things that modern medicine can do, they always say, look at what God has